Hello and welcome to part two of the Cohesity series on exploring modern data security and management. So for those of you who are new to the series, we're delighted to have you with us. And of course, for those of you who attended the first session last month or watched it on demand, welcome back. So today we're talking about a critical element of modern data security and management, intelligent ransomware defense. So my name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this timely discussion. Now, before we get to today's important topic, we have a few more housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Okay, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to 5 great resources from Cohesity in the handout section. The first one is a copy of the report Intelligent Data Security and Management. So this series of webinars coincides with a series of reports prepared by Cohesity and Actual Tech Media on exploring modern data security and management. You can download the report this session is based on right there in your handout section. Also in the handouts are 4 other great resources. There's a PDF about the Cohesity platform, 2 others on building cyber resilience against destructive cyber attacks and against ransomware. And there's also a link to the Cohesity Global Cyber Resilience Report for 2024. Great report, all great resources. You can download them throughout the hour, and please share them with any friends or colleagues who'd be interested. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage those questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get into today's panel discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Chris Hoff. Hang on a sec. I'm having a little slide difficulty. Let me make sure that it's, there we go. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. Chris Hoff, who's Senior Product Marketing Manager at Cohesity, and Melissa Palmer, who's an Independent Technology Analyst. So let me bring them on. Chris, Melissa, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Chris, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how you came to be focused on data protection at Cohesity.
Yeah, absolutely. So the world of backup and recovery has changed in the past 5 to 7 years because of threats like ransomware. We've moved from the days of recovering, I'll say 5 to 10% of our data to having to recover hundreds of terabytes, maybe even up to 100% of our data, while also having somebody work against us in trying to stop us from doing that. And their goal is, of course, to separate you from your money. And so we're focused on making sure that not only can you restore your data, but you can restore that data cleanly, and you can stop the attackers from getting back in and doing more damage.
Gotcha. I love that. I haven't heard anybody put it that way about how little of the data we used to have to recover, or we were focused on recovering, and what a change that is. And it's such a great way of thinking about it, that somebody's on the other end fighting against us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Melissa, you've got a long and storied history in the industry. Can you share with the audience a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, I do. So all throughout my career, I would say that I've always been infrastructure focused and security adjacent. Probably until the last 5 to 7 years, of course, because I kind of saw the threat of ransomware very early on. And I was personally horrified by how little infrastructure people specifically understood the threat. So I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years on the ransomware side of things, secure and resilient architectures, and I kind of have a little bit of a focus on VMware-based ransomware as well because I'm a VMware certified design expert.
Gotcha. Well, you've done excellent work getting infrastructure people to understand the threat. I think the word is out. So to get started with today's topic, let's talk about where we are with ransomware in 2024. And so I've got a slide up here that's adapted from an expert series presentation we did over the summer on ransomware. And the main question here is, like it says in the old U2 song, is it getting better or do you feel the same? So, in 2021, we had 2,866 ransomware attacks. This is according to Recorded Future, who does a lot of ransomware research. 2022 went down a little bit, 2,581 attacks. 2023 really jumped up to almost 4,400. And then this year, it looks like we're on track for, 3,800, 3,900. Basically, the number there is through June 30th. So, I guess, my question to you guys is, does this sort of trend, jibe with what you're both seeing out there in terms of overall volume of ransomware attacks?
It does, yeah, and what we're seeing a lot of is we're using the word ransomware as kind of the catch-all for cyber attack, and what we're hearing more and more from both our partners and our customers is that the ransom portion of the attack is actually the last stage. So when we're talking about ransomware specifically, we could actually be undercounting the number of attacks that are actually happening.
Yeah, I'd have to kind of agree with that. I would say that as much as a lot of these surveys and research are anonymous, I think a lot of people don't want to come clean necessarily if they've experienced attack, because I think there's a big stigma around it still. A lot of people believe it won't happen to us, we're good, all that kind of good stuff. And, I see the trend going up. Maybe we're going to be a little less this year. It seems like it's tracking. But it's a tough one, right? It's a really tough thing. I agree completely that it's kind of become a catch-all for some kind of cyber attack. And there's lots of other things that people do in there before they even start with the ransom stuff, right? Or they could be in there for how long and not even bother. Right? Because, you're probably going to get caught once you actually deploy the ransomware. Like it's pretty obvious at that point that someone's in there. So a lot of the threat actors will be in there for a while taking things, right, that they might ransom later. But once they kind of do that encryption event, then they're caught, right? So that's definitely a trigger there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Excellent. So from a backup and recovery standpoint, what's happening with ransomware in terms of types of attacks and sort of their effects on backup strategies? Chris, let me kick that one to you first.
Yeah, so it's a struggle. It's a little frustrating. We're seeing a lot of those infrastructure people, those crazy infrastructure people, still thinking about ransomware or cyber attacks as just another disaster. I mean, it is a very different world from having the power outage to a cyber attack. If it's dark in the room, the power's gone out. You don't necessarily know that the cyber attack's happening, and what we're seeing more and more is this realization after the fact that they weren't as prepared as they should have been. And what I mean by that is in their disaster recovery plans, there's a lot of assumptions being made, right? It should work like this. It should work like that. This person should know what's happening. And we're seeing a lot of, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more as we're going through, there's a lot of the basics that aren't being taken care of. We're seeing a lot of folks. As a matter of fact, there was a statistic in the Sophos ransomware report earlier this year that I think it was 57% of attacks that targeted backups were successful. And so that means that half of those organizations weren't doing things like MFA. They weren't doing things like separation of duties. They weren't doing things, in some cases, even like immutability and encryption. So we've still got a long way to go before we're truly in a place where, you know, backing up your data is going to be the single best way to recover from a cyber attack.
Yeah, Melissa, anything to add on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, let's start with what Chris ended with, backing up your data. The number of people that still don't back up all their data is slightly horrifying, quite honestly. And it's like, well, that's not production. That's not important. And I'm like, are you really sure about that? Like, do you want to bet the farm that no one's like using this dev server as production and you don't actually need this data and stuff like that? So there's kind of an air of people are still not protecting everything, right? So that's a big problem. And then people aren't doing the right things with their backup systems, right? They're not treating it like critical infrastructure. They're not following their vendor's guidance for hardening. And quite honestly, I might have spent a little too much time researching ransomware and read some of the playbooks of the threat actors. And Chris is exactly right. They have instructions on how to target each of the backup systems. So if you deployed your backup software and never touched it again and didn't put things into place like immutability or multi-factor, all the stuff Chris mentioned, and we'll go more into details, yeah, you're still in trouble. So even if you are backing everything up, if you're not taking the steps to secure that, that is still a very big gap and a very big issue.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, you guys both mentioned some basics. You know, let's pivot into some of the key capabilities for ransomware data protection and recovery, and what it takes to have an intelligent data security and management strategy when it comes to ransomware in 2024. And while we're discussing this, I'm going to use the slides area as sort of, I'm pointing the wrong way, as a separate track to rotate through some pull quotes from that Cohesity Intelligent Data Security and Management white paper and key capabilities for ransomware data protection and recovery. But Chris and Melissa, I'd like to split this question to you guys into two parts. So first, I'd like to cover sort of basic table stakes capabilities, and then I'll ask about more emerging or even cutting edge strategies next. But when it comes to basic defenses that nearly every solution has and that everyone should be turning on and using, what are those?
Oh, absolutely. Immutability. It is baked into most backup solutions these days.
And if it's not, get a new one.
100%. You know, if the solution itself, I mean, we wouldn't buy a anti-malware product that doesn't update itself and catch new malware. So buying a backup solution that's not going to stop basic attacks is a problem. But following the vendor guidance on hardening, Melissa mentioned it, you know, and I'm going to harp on it quite a bit because you know, people are not turning on MFA, and that is one, and you know, it's not foolproof, but it is one way to reduce your overall risk.
And it can be a deterrent, right? So if a threat actor gets in and it's annoying, and you've got MFA and you've got this and you got that, they might just leave, right? Because there's probably someone out there they won't have to put that much effort into to get what they want, to get their ransom, right? So a lot of this stuff can even be a deterrent once a threat actor is in the system. Sorry to derail you, Chris.
No, you're absolutely right. It's an ROI calculation for them, right? Because how do I maximize the value of the service that I'm selling? And as the service is stealing your data. But you know, how do I separate you from the most amount of money possible?
I want to get as many people as I possibly can as easily as possible, right? I don't want to waste time on somebody that actually like secured their stuff. I'll just leave and find someone who didn't.
That's right. Yeah, and to Melissa's point about backing up all the data, being able to see where all the data is becoming a bigger problem. I mean, you know, the number of copies of data that just exist is growing. Even with, you know, cloud centralization and cloud services and all that, you know, people are still downloading copies of data and using it on their local laptops. Not that I'm guilty of that.
Oh, of course not. No,
I'm sure you've never done that.
No,
Yeah.
no.
But being able to find all those workloads and being able to keep them all in I'll say one place, right, one centralized location is becoming table stakes, because we have to think of all of those different workloads and all those locations for our data as in a similar way.
Melissa, any other basics or table
Yeah,
stakes
let me
things you can
add
think
a couple. Probably like my favorite like security concept ever is going to be the principle of least privilege. So making sure that people only have the rights they need to do their job. And there's a couple of technologies that kind of, and processes that come into that, right? Separation of duties for one, like, okay, this person should only be allowed to do X, Y, Z. So maybe in backup world, I have an operations person and they're only allowed to do restores, right? That's all they can do. All they can do is go in and restore a VM, for example. They can't start a new backup. They can't delete backups. They can't change job schedules. All they can do is restore because that's their job. One example. And with that goes like with a really good granular RBAC, right? Because these people have these certain responsibilities. We want to make sure they can only do what they want to do. So if someone's like, well, we're just going to give you the keys to the kingdom and trust you to only do restores, like that doesn't work, right? We need to back it up. So that's like my favorite kind of like security concept ever. And I feel like that goes a long way, because you have to remember, these threat actors could literally be like buying credentials on like the dark web, right? So that once they get in, they could have a bunch of credentials for people in your org and just start like trying to like log in as Chris, for example. And if Chris is the backup guy, but has domain admin rights, like that's going to get you in a lot of trouble. So that's kind of just like a concept I really talk to a lot of people about, just in all areas of the infrastructure.
And the separation of duties, and in Cohesity world, we call it quorum. Having those types of capabilities means that even if something like MFA is compromised, then you've got another step that's going to frustrate the attacker.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So those were some of the sort of table stakes things. Just back of the envelope question for you guys. How many people are, doing all of the table stakes things correctly?
Do you want the real answer, or like
the
of
course I want the real
correct answer? The real answer is it's horrifying, and most people aren't even doing the basics. We've seen a big shift, and I don't know if anybody's like just followed, like, how do attackers get in, right? And for years and years, it was people click the link because people are bad. So let's train all the people and hope they don't click a link. But over like, I would say like the last year or two, it's kind of been equal or flipped to like software vulnerabilities, right? Like people are getting in a different way and basically circumventing the users, right? I'm getting in and I'm exploiting code or all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's when all these kind of layers of defense become really important. I think that we completely over-rotated on people are bad, let's fix the people, even though they can't be fixed. And a lot of people put so much effort into that they kind of like forgot to do everything else, because, hey, we got to report that everybody finished their security training. So like, we're good, right? No, you're not good. You're not good at all.
But if you're also not turning on the tools for the people to use,
exactly,
then that you're causing your own problem. And I like to say that if I can teach my mom how to use MFA,
that's actually a really good analogy.
We should be able to turn it on in corporate America.
And that's the thing. And I think that's what like a lot of the user training stuff kind of missed, is like, here's whatever and here's whatever, but people are people, and it's an extra step and blah 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 blah, and we don't want to disrupt the users. Just force it. They'll adapt. Like, be done with it. Just make them do it. In a week, it won't bother them. I promise.
Okay. Well, thanks for those honest answers there. So second part of that original question, let's get into those emerging capabilities or the more cutting edge techniques. What's out there for data protection against ransomware that, maybe people in our audience might not have heard about, or that, could be important moving forward?
So a couple things. So we're hearing more and more a theme that our customers want to do more with their data, and that more, I almost have to use air quotes for it. That's different depending on who you talk to. If you talk to the business folks, it's analytics. If you talk to the security folks, it's things like threat hunting. And so we've got, you've got your anomaly detection and your malware detection baked into your backups. Being able to take that corpus of data and sift through it and find the latent attacks is becoming more and more popular. As a matter of fact, organizations are starting to realize that they've got what is essentially a copy of their data center sitting in their backups, and they can be pretty aggressive in their threat hunting. And what I mean by that is they don't have to worry about taking a production system offline. They can break something if they have to, and they can learn more. They can learn more faster, being outside the purview of the potential attacker.
And I just want to camp onto that because as someone who spent a lot of time doing disaster recovery and helping customers figure out how they can justify that they can actually put this solution into place, that is probably my number one use case. Like, look at all the things that you can actually do if you have a copy of your data. Number one is actually test your recovery, right? Let's not forget that. Because at the end of the day, we want to recover this stuff, right? So if I have an isolated copy, I can spin it up and make sure it works without impacting production. Number one, that's huge. I know I'll be able to recover. And then a lot of the different things Chris mentioned, I love almost application security testing in the bubble, right? Just kind of go in, wreak havoc, see what you could possibly break because you can't impact everything else. And that's probably the best way if you're sitting there going, okay, I know I have issues. I know I need a better backup solution. I know I need to get there. That is probably one of the best tools in your tool belt to help you get the ammunition to say to your stakeholders, hey, this is the money we need to spend. This is why we need to spend it. And by the way, we can do all this other cool stuff to bring value to our organization after the fact as well.
Yep, absolutely. And to your point, using the backups to test your patches, make sure that
because no one tests their patches, right? That's my number one thing. No one wants to patch because they can't test it. Yes, you can spin up your data center in the bubble, test your stuff, and deploy the patches, and that takes care of the vulnerabilities that everybody's using to get in. Hello.
Absolutely. And you've got up here, encryption as we're seeing more and more. We're actually starting to see conversations about quantum encryption, which boggles my mind. But we're starting to have people talk about moving beyond AES 256 and getting into AES 4096
maybe.
I think it's 4096, yeah.
I'm starting to question myself in numbers. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of that focus on protecting the data as well. And in your last slide, we have to pull out our buzzword bingo sheets, right? And we're seeing a lot of introduction of AI into the mix,
of course,
particularly
it's everywhere. But it's actually useful here.
And we're seeing a lot of folks using it now for data mining for all of that analytics that I mentioned that the business is looking for, because they can now start trolling through all of that data and gain more insights into what's happening in their business, all using AI.
So using that backup copy of the data for data analytics and using AI in there to find trends, to do the data mining. Interesting.
Absolutely.
And Melissa, you brought up, the testing patches. I mean, that's really smart. And you just don't hear about that often, about using that, that recovered system, spinning that up to test patches. But as far as actually, testing your recoveries, what's sort of the best practice in terms of how often to do that?
All the time. Be doing it constantly. I'm not even joking. The trick to that is it needs to be automated. right? Like I can't just like, I remember the days, and I remember I'm going to date myself a little bit. I'm not going to give dates. But like when I was an infrastructure intern back in the day, like I did a DR test. We all went to the data center. We locked ourselves in. I had my little clipboard, right? That I was checking the little boxes, and like we kind of recovered like a couple systems, and they like kind of worked. And then everybody like pat themselves on the back that we checked all the boxes, and we did our DR test like twice a year, right? That wasn't representative of anything that you would ever face in the real world, because I can tell you, a couple months later, we had an issue there, and it was nothing like our little DR test. Like it was trouble, right? So a lot of people are kind of used to the check the box, please the auditor DR test, and they don't care if they pass or fail. Well, they care if they pass, right? So they engineer the test so they pass the test, so they're in compliance. Yeah. But really, we need to be doing radical full-scale recovery testing right now, all the time. I would say like monthly would probably be pretty good, right? Because you'd catch any new systems, any kind of stuff like that. But again, it has to be automated for that. I need to go be able to click a button, run my DR test, and know I'm good to go to do that, right? In an isolated environment. And then maybe I could use that environment for analytics or something, like tie them together, right? Do the DR test, and hey, security team, go break that app, see if you can. You're in the cyber vault, so it doesn't matter, like have fun.
Yeah.
We are starting to see some of that in security tabletop exercises, because back in the day, I'm not going to date myself either. Just looking at me dates myself, I know. But back in the day, you do a security tabletop exercise, and it was go through the exercise, and at the end you said, okay, now backup Bob is gonna recover.
Pat everybody on the back, right? I'm like, hey,
we check the box and we go for drinks.
Like that's it, right? It wasn't actually
Yep.
representative of what we would do in the real world.
Yep. And now the backup guys are actually being asked to prove that they can restore the data. And that's a great step in the right direction.
Well, and Melissa, your example, with the DR test that you were involved with, I mean, I think that gets back to Chris's point early on too, about just, back in the day, it was like 5 or 10% of the systems you'd identified as like mission critical systems,
yeah, exactly.
And everybody else could go spit as far as like, whether they got their data back.
But that was a while ago. So infrastructures are also, that was before the days of VMware basically too. Like, right? Like these were all physical servers I was recovering too. Like what, me touching a physical server and recovering it? Like seriously? Yeah, I used to do that stuff. But the rise of virtualization and cloud has made it so easy to deploy stuff. There's just so much more now too, right? So a lot of it, and this is where AI and ML can help too, right? To look at your infrastructure, look at your cloud deployment, look at your virtualization, and just like take a look. Like, are you actually backing everything up, or do we see gaps, right? Like, maybe we could flag this for you, that you could kind of take a little closer look at this. There's just so much more data today than there was whenever.
Yeah. That brings up another thing I wanted to ask about. So, we talked a little bit, Chris, you gave that example of like doing data analytics on your backup data, which is like a clear use case for AI and some of the sort of advanced newer capabilities. But is AI built into any of like the core backup functions these days? Are there ways that, the companies are using AI to improve the backup experience, or along the lines of what Melissa was talking about?
Yeah, so for us there is we've got an entire product line for it, which this is not an ad for that, but companies are starting to use AI to run their tests. They're starting to use AI to help the security teams and the backup teams respond to incidents. Because we've still got that issue where we just don't have enough bodies in security, and so by being able to use something like AI to say, okay, I'm seeing this, whatever this incident is, what should I do next, allows the backup team to respond faster and with more intelligence behind it. People intelligence, not necessarily technology intelligence, and we're seeing that grow quite quickly. I mean, we're long beyond the days of AI reading the manual to you, right? Or pointing you a knowledge-based article.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. Okay. Well, speaking of Cohesity, so we've talked in generalities about technologies and best practices, but I know Cohesity has a lot of IP around some of these very topics. So, Chris, I hope you can walk us through some of that, and then we'll go to audience questions after that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mentioned we've got an entire initiative around AI. Our goal is to do exactly what I described, right? Help organizations do analytics and help them recover faster from attacks. To the conversation that we've actually been having, one of the things that we've been looking into is how do we make our backups more incident response ready and make them a tool for that response process. And one of the ways that we're doing that is in what we're referring to as a clean room, right? And you can think of a clean room as an isolated environment that you're going to do work in order to recover clean data. There's two groups that are involved in this, right? We've got the infrastructure folks who want to just recover. We've got the security folks who want to know what's going on. So when an attack happens, obviously we need to be prepared. We need to have the right tools and software in place in order to make this happen, right? We call that a digital jump bag. But when that destructive attack happens, we need to kick off the process, right? We need to initiate what we like to call a minimum viable response capability. And that's where the security folks are going to spin up the tools that they need in order to do the actual investigation into the attack. And this is a completely isolated environment. So they can be as aggressive as they want. And as I mentioned earlier, they're doing it out of the view of the attacker so that as they're doing their investigation, they're not being countered by the attacker. They can then hand off the evidence that they've gathered to the infrastructure team, and the infrastructure team can then start to mitigate the threat. Call it a staging area, call it what you want, but the idea here is that we're going to spin up a system, do the cleaning, if you will, and then do our testing, patching, all of that work, and then put it back into production. And so the reason that this is important is if we look through the process in general, a lot of folks will only look at that mitigation phase, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of focus on that, right? That there's a big magic button. You press the big magic button. It runs a malware scan. If it comes back clean, you put it back in production. You're fine, right? And folks will talk about instant mass restores and all of that. Well, there's a study out from last year that says that 80% of the people who follow that type of process reinfect themselves. So let's do something differently. And what we've been looking at is how do we use these tools that our customers already have in order to build that isolated environment, so that they can do good. They can go threat hunting. They can run their tests. They can run their patching, and they can run through a comprehensive recovery process that gets clean data back faster. And this workflow is pretty involved. You'll notice that there's a few items in there that are in blue that are part of our partner ecosystem. But the point of all this is that we can run through this process, and we can change the process to meet the needs of the incident that's occurring out there. And so when we're talking about things like recovery and incident response, we're really looking at how we can be part of that solution and be part of the what I like to call the integrated security stack.
I just have to hop in here, Chris, because you just like basically gave us all the missing piece. And what people don't realize is we don't know, like we can prepare for ransomware, right? All we want, but we don't know what kind of attack and what kind of threat we face till it actually happens. And the big missing link is that initial phase of the incident response where that needs to be determined. Like you'll talk to a lot of people who just want to jump to, hey, we're ransomware, okay, let's restore. No, there's a bunch of stuff we need to do first to understand, how the threat propagated, what's infected, all that kind of stuff. Like there is an incident response process. And if your backup team is not connected to your infrastructure team, is not connected to security team, if they've never talked to each other before that day, like you're going to have a lot of problems. So I really kind of love this methodology of let's start with incident response, figure out our output there, and then based on our output, we can recover appropriately. That's really the way to do it.
Okay. So I think we're gonna. I think Scott, you wanted to move into Q&A at this point.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so we do have we've got a few questions that are in already, and feel free to enter more questions if you've got them. Let's see, we've got a question here from Richard who's asking, how might this least privileged RBAC stance play against headcount pressure in the current job environment? Any thoughts on that?
That's given my phone's blowing up in the background, I've got a lot of thoughts about that.
I guess my take would be on it. If you have business needs that people need to wear multiple hats, keep them as adjacent as possible. Right? Like, okay, so maybe logically speaking, I need someone with Windows and Linux skills, and they're going to handle servers, right? And we're going to manage servers as Windows and Linux, one group instead of multiple teams, right? Because a lot of times people have like different teams based on OS and stuff. That's one way. You might try to be logical. Like I've seen a lot of people combine vSphere and storage teams actually, because vSphere is a huge consumer of storage. And then I wouldn't say like have the backup guy be the Active Directory guy, because again, that's like a threat type of thing. If this person has credentials to both environments, those are both targets for threat actors. So try to keep things as adjacent as possible and don't combine really important things together.
Yeah, that's also where failure. Yeah, that's also where things like quorum come into play, right? Because you're changing a policy maybe to a backup job. It has to be approved by somebody else, and that approval could quite literally be, "Hey, Melissa, why are you doing this?" And Melissa says,
"Wait, Melissa, I didn't do that. What are you talking about? I don't usually touch the backups or whatever." Or, wait, Melissa, you only want to hold this backup for an hour, then you want to delete it forever? Like, is that legitimate here? No, it's not.
All right. Thanks for the question, Richard. We've got one from Steven who's asking, does Cohesity do monthly security follow-up calls with its customers to ensure security target points are an ongoing priority? And I guess I'd expand that to, what kind of, best practices, support and resources do you guys offer to your customers?
So great question. So the short answer is yes. But within our support organization, we have what we call CERT, and what that is a cyber incident. It's a cyber event response team. So any of our customers who are having an issue with ransomware or some kind of cyber attack, will work with them, and we'll also work with your incident response provider. So if you've got a contract with, say, a Cisco Talos or a Mandiant or Palo's Unit 42.
And I hope you do.
We can work with them to make sure that you've got all the right skills in place. We're also taking that back to the beginning of our customer deployments, making sure that they're running through hardening properly, making sure that they've got things set up correctly, so that when the inevitable happens, you're better prepared for it.
Okay, excellent. We've got another question here. How fast can you recover from ransomware? Which is sort of a deceptively simple question, but I'd love to hear, when you get into the clean room recovery stuff, how long should that process take, before you're really recovering your data?
That's a tough question to answer, because depending on your industry, there's a number of legal issues that you have to go through, right? Ransomware negotiations, getting boots on the ground. Next year, for anybody who's doing business over in Europe, when DORA comes into effect, that's going to be adding time. But the simple answer is that you can speed up the recovery by finding the threat faster. And that's an it's depends answer, right? But the idea is that if we can make sure, to the best of our knowledge, that there is not going to be a threat reintroduced into the environment, then we get the data back faster. And so by going through a process and having a documented process for that, we're going to be able to shorten the overall time. Because you could click the big magic button and you could recover, but if you're recovering malware, you're starting all over again.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Melissa, one of the things you mentioned was MFA, and there's a question here: why isn't MFA good enough? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Let's see. I believe it was Cisco. Was Cisco the one who was hacked? They kept on, the MFA was through text messages, and they kept spamming the person with text message links at 3 a.m. and eventually they just clicked the link to shut it up. MFA is still going through a human. Humans still do things. They can still be tricked. Again, it's a big deterrent. It makes it less likely to happen, but it is not perfect and is not foolproof. Like, all right, what if I'm targeting Chris, right? And I see Chris at Starbucks and I take his cell phone and I've seen him put in his little 4-digit password and I know what it is, right? And if I have his cell phone, I have his MFA. Stuff like that. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And again, it's a huge deterrent. It's a great addition, but it's just nothing is really enough. Yeah. You can't just have one thing and expect it all to go away and be better. Definitely turn it on, but it's not the be all end all.
Chris, any thoughts on that one?
I couldn't agree more, except Melissa's never going to get my cell phone.
Yeah, I know.
So the gauntlet's thrown. But we have seen a number of times over the years that the actual MFA providers have been breached. And so, it's not about having, just, which is a word I can't stand, a secure environment, but reducing your overall risk. MFA goes a long way to reducing risk. And the more you can reduce risk, to Melissa's point earlier, the better chances you have of either not being breached or frustrating the attacker so that they go on to somebody else.
Okay, excellent. There's a question here from Richard. It's a little bit outside the scope, but it's an interesting question, so I'll go ahead and pass it along. I was wondering, is it realistic for on-payroll security staff in the enterprise to come close to the capabilities of professional pen testers? And should periodic pen testing be table stakes for organizations, regardless of which vendor tools they have in place and how well they follow best practices? Any thoughts on that one?
So it's really hard to have people who are doing their day-to-day jobs also be pen testers, because we all have to have lives too.
No, we don't.
What I'm seeing, and Melissa, I don't know if you've seen it too, is
Free pen testing when you get breached? No, just kidding.
That's right. That's right.
Free pen test, yay! It's not a ransomware attack; it's a free pen test.
That's right. We're seeing insurance providers requiring it and providing the services.
They're requiring pen testing, and they're requiring incident response on call, an incident response contract.
And so it's not necessarily about having the people in your staff with those skills, but it is paying the money to have the test done.
Exactly. And let's say that's important. Let's say I hire Chris, who is an amazing pen tester, right? Chris is just a great pen tester, and I hire him to run my security team. Besides the fact that Chris has day-to-day things, he might be an excellent pen tester, but I'm going to get like a little nerdy here, a little soliloquy, but there's like almost a little art to pen testing, and everybody's going to do it a little different. And the benefit of having one guy on staff who's a good pen tester and hiring a firm is going to have a couple of different people take a look, and everybody's got these unique skill sets and unique nuances that they like to go after. You're going to get a much well-rounded, better test and more things looked at, more things tried when you engage one of these firms, because that's all they do, right? This is what they do. They go and they pen test. That is their specialty. So again, even if you hire the best pen tester and have them run the security team, it's not the same as getting that wealth and breadth of knowledge and experience when you hire a professional firm to do it for you.
Yeah, that's great.
Not that I've ever tried to do anything like that in my life, I swear.
Probably got time here for one more audience question. They're asking, what can I do if I find ransomware in my backups?
Depends who your backup vendor is. You better hope with Cohesity. You have Cohesity already.
It does depend. So if you are finding the threat in your backups, you're actually in a decent spot because it's not running and in production. But so deleting the file or deleting the threat and cleaning it up is a possibility in restoring. But what is probably going to happen if the first time that you see that there's a threat in your environment is in your backups, you're already owned. So the first step has nothing to do with technology. It's picking up the phone and calling your incident response retainer.
Okay.
But that is a better way to find it than to log in one day and have the ransomware screen, right? Like I agree with Chris. If you found it in your backups, you're actually in a pretty good place because you found it before. Well, obviously they're in there doing who knows what, but now at least you know versus you didn't yesterday, and they had probably been there for a while.
Yeah, you didn't learn because somebody walked up to the help desk and said, "Hey, my laptop's acting funny."
Exactly.
All right. So, just Chris and Melissa, just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to offer any closing thoughts for the audience or pieces of advice before we wrap up. Let me kick this to Melissa first.
If you like your data, you should back it up now. If you want to keep it around, if you think you might need it, which you probably will, you need to be proactively backing up now. So if you're watching this, you're in a good place because now you know this. You need to be picking tools and processes that will do all the table stakes things we talked about, like cyber vaulting, immutability. We want RBAC. We want all these things. And in parallel, besides putting these tools in place, you need to be putting wider security processes in place. Like I said, I love the principle of least privilege. That's something you should be propagating in your environment. And if you're watching this and ready to take action, you're probably in a better place than a lot of people are already. So good job and keep going.
I would add to that if you know where all your data is, you're in a very good place. If you don't, there's a lot that we haven't discussed here, but having the ability to bring in information and signals from other places to create what I like to call it an integrated security architecture. being able to pull in information or even push out information into the security stack about the data that's there, that's going to get you pretty far along. The other thing that I constantly recommend is remove your assumptions. If during a tabletop exercise somebody uses the words "I think," then that needs to be addressed. If there's one person who knows whatever the topic is, that's a point of failure because that person's probably going to be on vacation when the attack happens. Murphy's Law. So remove your assumptions. Make sure you know where your data is, and start to think about where other ways that you can use your backup data. Whether it's from a security perspective or from a business perspective, because it is an asset that you have access to, and the companies who are going to be taking the lead in the next few years are the ones who are going to be able to do more with their data.
All right, excellent. Well, Chris and Melissa, those are both great closing thoughts, and this has been a really fun and thoughtful discussion. I just really appreciate both of your time and all your insights today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to let you guys go, and we'll get into the prize drawing, but thanks again. All right, and before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business, and that is the prize drawing, $250 Amazon gift card, and the winner is Kristen Rather from Tennessee. So congratulations to Kristen Rather. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Cohesity for making this event possible. And we hope to see you all again on October 17th for the last and potentially most interesting session in a great series on exploring data security and management. It's about what Chris was talking there about in his closing thoughts, which is, an AI-driven data insights. So the whole event is going to be on that part of it, and it has to do with using backup data as a source for your own, fine-tuning LLMs. So the idea is not only your data serving as a backup, but it's also a source of AI-driven insights that doesn't have an effect on your production system. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion. I know I don't want to miss it. I hope you'll be there too. So have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.